Everybody, I'm very happy to be here with all of you at Darwin Circle. And as I already heard, my name is Felix. I'm the head of Northern Europe at Stripe. At Stripe, we actually build infrastructure for online businesses. So, I mean, very simple. If you think about what an online business mostly does is, well, we help them sort of, process and accept money. And money, to stay a bit high level for a second, is the shared product of culture, technology, and regulation. And in some ways, it's fuel as well as lifeblood for the online economy. So to look at the online economy for a second, I hope you see the slides here. The online economy, okay, there we go. The internet online economy is still only at this point, only 5% of the overall economy. So despite all these years of investments, we're still only at scratching the surface. And not only is sort of the online economy compared to the overall economy still that small, it's also still very, very local. So the share of the clicker's not going well. Here, the share of transactions that actually go across border is only 16% for Europe, for instance. So basically still mostly local traffic, mostly local transactions. Very much misleading the word global in a way. So you heard this morning Mr. Kamp saying he talked about an evolution, not a revolution, right? And you could wonder, well, so why is it not more? Why is it not faster? And why is it sort of still at the stage that we're currently at? And what I would like to talk about today with you and show you share some thoughts here is what would it take to accelerate this further and actually really kick off a massive movement in terms of online economy that kind of follows a bit more the trend of the internet, which is actually unlimited and much more explosive in a way. So what we do at Stripe is exactly that. That's our mission. Our mission at Stripe is to increase the GDP of the internet. And that's a fairly macroeconomic description of a fairly macro ambition. So what that means is we want to make it easier for companies to get started, and we want to help those companies grow faster. And if you think about, you don't want to limit that, right? So we want to support businesses anywhere in the world, no matter what the business model is, and no matter where they want to sell. And the reason why we came actually into being is because we saw how painful it was in the old days for a business to get started. And maybe some of you have gone through these pains in the past. You had to get an acquirer, you had to get a fraud solution, you had to get all sort of things that made your life miserable. And we really sort of invested in making an abstraction happen where you don't have to worry about all these things anymore, where basically you're shielded from this and there's only one interface you have to deal with, which is Stripe, and we provide a simple API. And effectively what we want to do is we want to make it as simple to move money around anywhere in the world as it is maybe to start a server on Amazon Web Services that we just heard from. And we are doing this with the help actually of a lot of financial partners in the back. You don't actually have to work with them directly. We do for you, but there's a lot of robust and very well-known companies behind us. And then on the side of the merchants, the businesses that we work with, we actually power them, not just big companies, but also small companies, so the full range, from 2 people to public company. And here's a list of companies. You have probably seen some of those. There's some smaller companies, some bigger companies. And the one thing they have all in common is actually ambition. So all these companies want to grow as fast as possible. They all want to bring their market product in the shortest period of time, and they sort of keep pushing, and they say, well, what if we bring our product to market in 6 months, maybe 4 months, maybe even 2 months? And so this is sort of a need for speed, so you could imagine, that is really goes across all of those. And to understand why this need for speed, so to speak, exists, you have to zoom out a bit, and you have to think a bit, okay, what is then ultimately driving GDP or overall economy? And that is effectively when you have to use an economy theory, and you come basically to the classical theory of money, which is basically a formula which goes as such. Money, availability of money, cost of money, times velocity of money equals the price level times the real GDP. So to simplify this a little bit, the right part you could basically say is the actual nominal GDP. So, okay, the equation becomes a little easier. The question is now, what do we focus on? The typical approach of an economist or the most of the business so far has been, well, it has to be the left part. The left part is, again, the availability of money. And that's why the Fed, the European Central Bank, and everybody else keeps lowering the interest rate, because they're saying if there's more money, GDP will go up. Because the traditional thinking is the second part of the equation, the V part, the velocity, is sort of a fixed determinant. You can observe it, but you can't really change it. And what I'm saying is, just looking at the internet and knowing how the world currently is, it's not the amount of money being available. It is the velocity of money that's limiting the overall internet economy. And that's the reason why we only have 5% and not more. And so let's sort of look quickly at why do we say that? Why is sort of the velocity of money the limiting factor? So if you look actually at the availability of money for a second, you find that in the US, for instance, the interest rate that the Fed is basically has put down is now almost 0%. It's since a decade like this, hasn't moved at all. There's tons of money going around. It's not just the US, it's also in Europe. Basically 0%, the lowest rates you could imagine. And it's not just the amount of money is basically for free. It's also that the equity keeps increasing at a really staggering pace. So this is the US S&P 500. It sort of meets basically record highs. Because if you think about each and every company has its own proprietary currency in the way that it helps if your stock is up, because that way you can give more compensation to your employees. It's cheaper for you to acquire companies because you dilute less, etc. So it also helps company to make basically moves in the business world. And it's not just the business, the companies that are public, it's also the private sector, private companies. So this is basically the number on the amounts of money that's committed to new VC funds. And even that number is almost pretty much at the level it was at the dot-com boom. And so you can imagine now, there's massive amounts of money. It doesn't cost much anymore, or nothing. And the companies that are supposed to get that money, so the private small tech companies that are hopefully bring that revolution and bring that new business economic activity, they need less and less money. So if you had 15 years ago, you basically needed millions to start a business. Today, you can do the same for a few $1,000s really. You can reach a global audience for just a few $1,000s, right? So if you think about it that way, it cannot, if all that has happened, if everything has been done, we are still only at 5%, well, the availability of money cannot be the main trigger, right? And so, coming back to our equation, it has to be the velocity of money. And it's funny because who knows and remembers the days when we talked about the information superhighway? Yeah, the internet was called that way, a few people. Yeah. So that was like not really a term that stuck, but it shows you that after 20 years, money as it moves through the internet is not quite on an autobahn. It's sort of crawling along its way, and it's not fast. But again, let's take a look at a concrete example which makes this a little bit more obvious why velocity of money is actually an issue. So imagine now you are an entrepreneur. Imagine now you want to build a marketplace, and let's say it's a shoe marketplace, and let's say you're based in Austria. And you have heard from companies like eBay or Katawiki that marketplaces are a proven business model, and you feel like, well, that's something I can do as well. And you kind of start to imagine what would it take to do, and how hard would it be. And most likely you know it's going to be actually a world that's almost limitless because there's the internet. And the more you kind of start digging, you start to realize it's actually really, really hard. And all the borders that you thought were gone in the internet are actually back. And they're back because there's regulatory requirements, there are legal requirements, there's policies, there's all sort of things that make it fairly complex for you to get started. And anyway, so you don't get too disheartened, and you keep going and you say, okay, well, what do I need to do? And again, you think, well, in the first instance, I probably have to find a way for sellers to register themselves, to identify themselves and say who they are. And well, you start to learn about those requirements. It's the identity crisis of money, right? You need to understand, is the person really who he is to claim? And then you do that. You hire engineers to build that technology. You keep further digging and you realize, well, I also have to build a treasury function because you need to move money from one end to the other. And that's actually fairly complex as well because you need to pump money to the extremities of your marketplace at the right time. So that's also fairly complex, and you hire more engineers. And your team basically so far is doing nothing else than building infrastructure that has nothing to do with your shoe marketplace, really. And it keeps going because you want to go to other countries. You realize, well, there's cultural differences. While in Germany or in Austria, people still like to pay with bank or with cards, etc. In Asia, you find it's more like a wallet, like an Alipay or WeChat Pay. And you hire people that integrate that. You hire lawyers because it goes cross-border. Anyway, and it keeps going, and you end up basically with this army of engineers. And the only thing you wanted to do was build a marketplace. But what you end up building instead is more like a Google Translate for money. And that's really not quite what you were trying to do in the first place. So if you take all that and the complexities that it just takes to build such a simple marketplace, you can really wonder, okay, is this the fastest you could go? Is this really the best we can do? And I guess the answer is not really. And so that's basically exactly our mission. We want to increase the GDP of internet, and we want to basically turn this pain that this shoe marketplace entrepreneur is going to like a matter of a few days, really. And that's what our product Stripe Connect is doing. And so with that, we hope that these borders actually start to go away again, and that you really sort of can enjoy the benefits of the real global market. And so then, step by step, these marketplaces and platforms that we talk about here now start to form new economic relationships. There's new sellers and new buyers that otherwise would not found each other, would not sort of deal with each other, sell to each other. And it's interesting because if you make it so easy for these platforms and marketplaces to prosper, you start to see a much wider network, and there's more points and more dots, and money moves from one transaction to another at a much faster clip. In the past, it was only the Googles and the Facebooks of this world that had these type of resources to build such massive marketplaces and sort of have the capabilities that it requires to do so. And if you think about it, even the biggest companies of the world, they are not enough to really sort of make a dent in the velocity. So it has to be thousands or millions of companies doing it all together. And that's sort of where we think a product that we described now can make a difference. Luckily, the future is not too far out, and we are almost getting there. And today there is already, for so many needs, some new marketplaces and platforms. So imagine you want to rent a Caterpillar or Liebherr for your weekend house because you need to do some construction. Guess what? There are some platforms. One is here from Munich, not far from here in KlarX, and many others. Or imagine you want to rent a transport for your horse. Guess what? There's a marketplace for that. Or you want to support someone who is in legal trouble and you want to help the defense fund. There's one for that as well. Or you want to find a photographer, an event agency, or just wine. There's a lot of more niche businesses springing up. And it's just a matter of basically thinking that about a bit more detail. And so let's hear for a second from one of my favorite marketplaces or platforms, which is a crowdfunding platform named Kickstarter from New York. We're looking to the technical team to play that video for us. No? Is that possible to play it? No? Okay. I see people being busy over there. So. Well, in the meanwhile, while we kind of wait, I can maybe explain what Kickstarter is. Or has anyone in the audience heard of Kickstarter before? Yes? Okay, a lot of hands. Great. So, and maybe again, while the colleagues looking whether they can get the video going, Kickstarter is effectively a platform that is exactly that, right? They connect people from anywhere in the world. There's ideas as far as Singapore, ideas as far as New Zealand, Australia. Is that the video? No. Australia, and they bring people together. And this is like new type of connections. Like I was not imagining that I will support an art project in Singapore at some point in the future, right? But thanks to a platform like Kickstarter, they bring these artists together with people that want to sort of initiate new products or new companies. And again, this is sort of something that has not been possible in the past, and Stripe is quite happy to be part of that and powering Kickstarter in their mission. Okay, so it seems that the video is not happening. Well, that's fine. Then let's move on. So to summarize, let me just go to the last slide then. So to summarize, the whole internet economy is really held back by so many hurdles. Be it, again, technology, cultural, regulatory. And we really want to overcome this, because if we really want to see sort of this grow, the overall economy grow, we have to make it easier for such businesses. And that's where Stripe comes in. And I think with the entrepreneurs and ambitions of the entrepreneurs, plus these new tools, we really hope to see a difference here. And in the future, we will not look at 5% anymore, but hopefully percentage is much higher. Thank you so much.